All right, in this introductory programming video, we'll be using VB.NET, the 2017 version. If you have 2015, it will still work. We're going to click on Visual Basic. We'll be doing a Windows Form app, and what we're going to do is we're going to name it Math. So once we do that, hit OK, and we'll load our form. Now that our form has loaded, we can go ahead and resize a little bit, get a little bit of room to work with. We can shrink it down later. The first thing I want to do is rename my form. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to look for the name, and I passed it apparently. Oh, here it is. And the prefix for the form is FRM, and I'm just going to call it form main, lowercase FRM, capital M, and then AIN. Now notice that did not change the text over here, and we don't want to leave it as form 1, so we're going to change the text. So I go over here and we'll just call this math. And then that'll change the text right up here. I want to add, subtract, multiply, divide, and exit, so I'm going to need 5 buttons. So I'm going to go into my toolbox here, and if your toolbox is not showing up, Control-Alt-X will get it there. Notice the toolbox shows all kinds of tools here. If you're on the code section and you click toolbox, nothing will show up. If you want objects to show up in your toolbox, you must be on the design tab. So go to the toolbox and we'll double click buttons 5 times because we need 5 buttons. So we'll go ahead. This will be my exit button, and we'll rename these, of course. We'll put this one here. You know, somewhat spaced out, a little professional. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename all of these. I'm not going to do the text just yet. I'll go name them first, then I will do the text. So this one's going to be my add button. I'm going to come over here, and the prefix for button is BTN. So I'm going to call that one add. This one's going to be my subtraction button. So I'll do subtract. This one over here, button 3, this is going to be my multiply button. So I'll do multiply. And then this button down here will be my divide button, BTN divide. And then this button over here, my last button, will be my exit button, BTN exit. Okay, so now what I need to do is I need to change the text. To do that, I just scroll up to the property that says text. So we're going to find that, and here it is, text. And I'm going to change this one from button 5 to exit. That way the user knows what they're doing. And I'm going to change the rest of these to their, this one's going to be add, subtract, multiply, divide. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And through the magic of video, it'll happen quickly. So go ahead and pause the video and change them. And we'll meet back when these have been changed. Okay, as you can see, we have add, subtract, multiply, divide, and exit, and we need to get some input from users, so we're going to add 2 text boxes. I'm going to go back to my toolbox. I'm going to scroll down to the text box, and I'm going to click it 3 times. We're going to get 2 numbers from the user, and then we're going to output the answer to the user as well. So 1, 2, 3 times, and we'll move these right over here. So we'll have actually move them back. So we'll have 2 boxes where the user will input information, and then we'll give the answer. Move my exit button up here a little bit, and we can shrink our form. Now we don't have it unnecessarily large. Move my exit button back. Now we need to let the user know what these text boxes are, and so we're going to add 3 labels. So I go back to my toolbox, I look in the L's because that's what label starts with, and I'm going to click it 3 times, or double click 3 times. And that will give me 3 labels. I'm going to move this label right here, this label right over here, and this label right over here. Let me line these up so it looks a little neater. There we go. Now I need to go ahead and name these text boxes. I'm not changing the text, I'm changing the name. So I'm going to scroll down to name, and I'm going to call it txt num1. Now the reason it's called txt num1 is it's the first number that the user is entering. The txt is the prefix for a text box. I'm going to do the same thing with this one, txt, but this one I'm going to call num2. That will be the second number that the user has entered. This text box down here will be my answer. So I'll do txt answer. Now that those have been named, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with the labels. So I'm going to do LBL, and this is number 1. Change this label 2 to LBL number 2. And I guess we really don't have to label these numbers because they're just going to say number 1, number 2, and answer. But it's good practice to go ahead and label all your objects. And this will be label answer. And then I need to change the text because the user is not going to know what label 3 means. I mean, we know what it is, but we're programming it. We're going to change this to answer. We're going to change label 2 to number 2. And we're going to change this label here to say number 1. Now, I need to move this back a little bit. We don't want it going into the text box. Perfect. Now what we need to do is actually make our program do something. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add some variables. So we're going to double click anywhere we want. Let's go ahead and double click on the form. And we have our code screen pop up. Go up here where it says public class form main. Hit enter. And get into this section right here. This is where we're going to declare our variables so they can be used across all subs. So the first thing we're going to do is dimensionalize some variables because that's what you do in this section. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to dimensionalize an integer. So we're going to do int, and that lets me know myself that it's an integer. And I'll do num1 as integer. What this means is in int num1 will hold a value. And I made it an integer, so we'll only deal with numbers. And when it's an integer, I can do some math with it. And then I'm going to do int num2 as integer. And I also need an exit button. So I'm going to do str exit because it's going to be a string. Now you can call these variables whatever you want. The reason we call it str and int is so we as programmers know what we're referring to. If we come back to this program 2 months from now or 3 months from now or whatever, we can see what the variables are and we know right away what they are and what they are doing. So now that I have this, the first thing I want to do is let's make the exit button work pretty easy. To make sure you're in the right section of your code, go back to your form, find your exit button, and double click on it. So now we know we're in the btn exit. We're in the right sub. If we just left it button 1, button 2, button 3, button 4, button 5, it would be a little hard to tell if we were in the right button. And the more buttons you have, the harder it is to figure out if you're in the right section. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do this. We're going to do str exit equals message box. Do you want to exit? And then what we want to do is we want to give them a couple options, yes or no. So we're going to do VB yes, no. And that will give them 2 option buttons. And we'll talk about what this code does in a minute. And then we need a simple if statement. If str exit equals VB yes, then application dot exit. And what that will do is that will close down our program. So what's happening here is we're asking the user, do you want to exit? Yes or no? And we gave them yes or no buttons right here. What we're doing is if they click on yes, it's going to be stored right here in str exit. If they click no, it's going to be stored in str exit. On the very next line of code, we're checking to see if they wanted to exit. If yes was stored into here. If it does equal VBS, then we want the application to exit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the program and I'm going to see if it works. All right, so we're looking to see if it works, and it will work. So we click on exit, we hit no, program's still running, perfect. We hit yes, and the program shuts down. Fantastic. So that is working. So what we need to do now is we need to get the math working. So we'll start with add. I'm going to go back to my form here. I'm going to double click on add. I double click on add. I'm in the right sub that I need to be. Now, what I need to do first is I need to load whatever's in the text boxes into the variable. And here's how that's going to work. My first number was int num1. And I'm going to set that equal to text box number 1. And I called it txt. And here's my text box. And this is why we number them. It's a lot easier to tell when we're going down the list. Now, I can't just do num1. If you'll see, there's a red line. It needs to know what part of the property of the text box we want to use. Well, we want to use what the user entered. So we want to pull from the text and store that into int num1. I also need to do that for number 2. So I do text num2.text. Now I have whatever the user entered in num1, I have stored in int num1. Whatever the user has entered for text box number 2, I have stored in int num2. There's no way for me to predict what they're going to enter, so I have to store it into a variable. Now all I have to do is add these two numbers together. So I'm going to do text answer.text. Now, what am I loading into this text box? What am I outputting? Well, the result of int num1 plus int num2. And then that will output the two numbers added together. So with that being done, we're going to go to subtract. We're going to do the same thing. Int num1 equals text num1. And then the same thing. Int num2 equals text num2. Make sure you put that dot text. You have to select the property of the text box that you want to store into the variables. And then my text answer dot text. What am I loading into this? I'm loading the result of int num1 minus int num2. Now, a question came up in class is, do I have to do this part of the code? The int num1 equals text num1.text, int num2 equals text num2.text. And the answer is, yes, you do. Is there really a more efficient way to do it? Of course there is, but this is just a basic introduction, and this will help you out really understanding code. So let's look at multiply. When they click on the multiply button, there's no code here. I have to store whatever is in the text box into these variables. So I'm going to go ahead and do it again. Okay, so I have that here. Notice we don't use an X, we use an asterisk symbol. If you type in an X, Visual Basic is going to try to recognize it as a variable. So if I had X here, it's not really going to know what to do with that. We see we're getting an error here. So what you have to do is you have to use the asterisk or the star key, and you can do that by holding Shift and clicking 8, and then that will give you a multiplication. Go ahead and hit Control S so you can save your project. We're going to go ahead and do divide now, and I'm going to do the same thing that I've been doing. Int num1 equals text num1.text. Int num2 equals text num2.text, and then my text answer.text equals, and we're going to do int num1 divided by int num2, and then that will give me my result. I'm going to hit Control S. Now what I need to do is simply test my program, make sure that it's working. So I'm going to go ahead and run it. So here's our program right here. We have add, subtract, multiply, divide, and exit. So what I'm going to use is I'm going to use the number 25 and 5. We'll use those numbers. If I add them together, it should come out to 30. It does. If I subtract these, it should come out to 20. It does. 25 times 5 should be 125. It is. And when I divide these numbers, it should come out to 5. It does. It is working. That is all there is to it. I'm going to test my exit button one more time. Do I want to exit? I need to click on no to make sure the program's still going to run. It is. Perfect. I'm going to hit yes, and the program closes. That's all there is to it. So not too many lines of code, right around 50. And I can get rid of all these extra spaces. I don't have to, but when getting rid of those extra spaces, we can see it's 49 lines of code. So nothing too complex at all. If you have any questions, please bring them to class, or you can post a comment below. We'll see you guys next time.